In the bustling parking lot of Everyday Essentials, James "Jimmy" Carter, a 73-year-old black veteran, stood in stunned silence after being forcibly removed from the store by its racist manager, Dale Johnson. The humiliation of the encounter still burned in his chest, but his thoughts quickly turned to his wife, Lucille, who was waiting at home, bedridden and in need of the medical supplies he had failed to purchase. As he gathered his composure, a familiar voice called out from behind him. "Excuse me, sir, please wait." Jimmy turned to see none other than Morgan Freeman, the legendary actor, hurrying toward him. Freeman carried 2 large bags of groceries, their contents clearly visible, items Jimmy had intended to buy but couldn't due to Dale's discriminatory actions. Freeman's presence was both surreal and comforting, a stark contrast to the hostility Jimmy had just faced. "Mr. Freeman?" Jimmy asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "The one and only," Freeman replied with a warm smile, his deep, resonant voice instantly putting Jimmy at ease. "My name is James Carter," Jimmy said, extending his hand. Freeman shook it firmly, his grip strong and reassuring. "I witnessed what happened in the store," Freeman said, his expression turning serious. "That kind of treatment is unacceptable, especially toward a fellow veteran." Jimmy's posture straightened at the mention of his service. "You served as well, didn't you, Mr. Freeman?" "Air Force," Freeman confirmed. "Mechanic, specializing in radar systems. But please, call me Morgan." The 2 men shared a moment of mutual respect, their shared experiences as veterans creating an instant bond. Freeman gestured to the grocery bags he carried. "I hope you'll accept these. It's the least I can do to make up for the shameful way you were treated in there." Jimmy started to protest, but Freeman held up a hand. "Please, I insist. Consider it a small token of appreciation from one veteran to another." Overwhelmed by the gesture, Jimmy nodded in gratitude. The bags were heavier than expected, filled not just with the essentials he had sought but also fresh produce and other high-quality items. Freeman then offered to drive Jimmy home, and the 2 climbed into a sleek black car driven by a professional chauffeur. During the ride, Freeman listened intently as Jimmy opened up about his life with Lucille, their struggles, and the daily acts of love and sacrifice that defined their relationship. Freeman's presence was a stark contrast to Dale's earlier cruelty, and Jimmy found himself feeling a sense of dignity and recognition he hadn't felt in years. When they arrived at Jimmy's modest home, Freeman helped carry the groceries inside. The small living room was neat but crowded with medical equipment, a hospital bed, oxygen tanks, and various mobility aids. The walls were adorned with faded family photos and Jimmy's framed military commendations, telling a story of a life rich in love and service, if not in material wealth. Lucille, lying in bed, was stunned to see Morgan Freeman standing in her doorway. "Mr. Freeman," she gasped, trying to sit up straighter despite her limitations. "Mrs. Carter," Freeman said warmly, "it's an honor to meet you. Your husband has told me a little about you on our way here. I hope you don't mind my intrusion." "Not at all," Lucille replied, still looking bewildered. "But Jimmy, what happened? Why is Mr. Freeman here?" Jimmy chuckled softly and moved to Lucille's side, taking her hand in his. "It's a long story, dear, but Mr. Freeman, Morgan, helped me out of a difficult situation at the store." As Jimmy recounted the events, Freeman quietly observed the couple's interaction, noting the deep bond between them despite their challenging circumstances. When Jimmy finished, Lucille looked at Freeman with gratitude. "Thank you for helping my husband. It means a lot to us." "You're most welcome," Freeman said. He then turned to Jimmy. "I can tell from the way you've been handling things that your wife means the world to you. But I also know this kind of care isn't easy on either of you." Lucille nodded, her eyes tired but grateful. "It's been difficult. I have multiple sclerosis. The doctor said I need complete bed rest to prevent further complications. My muscles are weak, and my balance is off, which makes everyday tasks more challenging. It's not something we can just ignore, and the flare-ups can be really unpredictable. Freeman's gaze softened. I understand. Progressive MS can be relentless. It's a disease that affects more than just the body, it impacts every part of your life. The right equipment makes a world of difference, but it can be overwhelming. Jimmy sighed, his gaze distant as he looked at his wife. It's been hard for Lucille, trying to manage everything, but it's hard for me too. Some days, it feels like I'm barely holding it together, especially with the cost of it all, the inflating price of medications, the supplies, the equipment. Everything. Lucille gave a weak smile, her fingers tightening around Jimmy's hand. It's not just the physical strain. It's the emotional toll too. I can see the stress it's causing you, Jimmy, but I need you here, helping me get through each day. As Freeman prepared to leave, he handed Jimmy a sealed letter. I'd appreciate it if you read this later, in private, he said gently. Jimmy hesitated briefly, then took the letter and slipped it into his pocket. He gave Freeman a firm handshake. Thank you for everything. You didn't just help me today, you gave me back my dignity. Freeman nodded solemnly. You've earned that many times over, Jimmy. Take care of yourself and Lucille. After Freeman left, Jimmy returned to the bedroom, where Lucille was waiting. He opened the letter, his hands trembling slightly with anticipation. Inside was a check for $80,000, along with a note acknowledging the government's frequent failure to properly honor veterans' sacrifices. The message read: Dear Mr. Carter. This is a little thank you for everything you've done for this country, something the government often fails to do. It's time veterans are treated with the respect and rewards they deserve. Your dignity in the face of adversity is a testament to the very values you fought to protect. Sincerely. Morgan Freeman Star. Jimmy's eyes widened as he read the amount on the check. He handed it to Lucille, who gasped in disbelief. $80,000, she whispered. And all our medical expenses and supplies to be covered by a foundation for veterans' families? Jimmy, is this real? Jimmy nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. It's real, sweetheart. All of it. For a moment, they sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of this gift slowly sinking in. Then, almost in unison, they began to laugh, a joyous, relieved sound that filled their small home with hope and possibility. As their laughter subsided, Jimmy leaned in to kiss Lucille gently. Things are going to be easier now, love. We can get you that new wheelchair, maybe even look into some home improvements. Lucille squeezed his hand, her eyes shining. Oh, Jimmy, it's like a weight has been lifted, isn't it? Jimmy nodded, feeling tears prick at his own eyes. It sure is. And you know what? It's not just about the money. It's about being seen, being valued. After all these years, you deserve it. Jimmy, Lucille said firmly, you've given so much to this country and to me. It's about time someone recognized that. As they sat together, sipping their juice and discussing plans for the future, Jimmy felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. The day that had begun with humiliation had ended with renewed hope and dignity. Outside, the world continued to turn. At Everyday Essentials, policies were being rewritten, staff were being retrained, and a new era of respect for veterans was dawning. In newsrooms across the country, the story of an unnamed veteran's encounter with discrimination and the celebrity intervention that followed was being prepared for broadcast, promising to spark conversations about how America treats its heroes. But here, in this modest home filled with love and newfound hope, Jimmy and Lucille Carter simply held hands and smiled, grateful for each other and for the unexpected twists of fate that had brought them to this moment of peace and possibility. As the afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over the room, Jimmy realized that sometimes the greatest battles we face are not fought on foreign soil but in our own communities. And sometimes, the most powerful weapons we have are not guns or tanks but kindness, dignity, and the courage to stand up for what's right. With Lucille's hand in his and a future suddenly bright with promise stretching out before them, Jimmy Carter, veteran, husband, and unexpected catalyst for change, felt truly at peace for the first time in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger and more hopeful than ever before.